in dealing with privacy issues. At the close of our speaker's presentation, there will be a time for questions, and we'd like to ask you to go to the mic in the center aisle, and your questions will be taken in order of your arrival. Beginning at 12 noon today, there will be a panel discussion in the Bonner Room of the Student Union Building, which I would like to invite all of you to attend, and our speaker will also be present at that time. Our speaker today is a San Francisco native and a Phi Beta Kappa graduate in philosophy from the University of California at Berkeley. She started with People magazine in her hometown in 1980, and later moved to Washington, D.C. to become People's Magazine bureau chief at the beginning of 1989. In 1991, after a year of on-site coverage of the Gulf War, Yugoslavia, and Russia, she was appointed Chief of Correspondence for People. I would like to introduce Maria Wilhelm, who will discuss interpersonal relationships, lifestyles, and the right to privacy. Who can you trust? Maria?
Good morning, and thank you. It's a pleasure to be in your beautiful city and an honor to speak at the 23rd Annual Popcorn Forum. I had a conversation the other day with Roxanne Pulitzer, the tall, toothy, and overly tan ex-wife of newspaper heir Peter Pulitzer, a woman whose exploits have outraged and sometimes entertained the staid and moneyed residents of Palm Beach. It was during their 1982 courtroom custody battle that Roxanne was alleged to have slept with a trumpet for metaphysical purposes, she said. It was also revealed her many partners in bed included blonde and winsome Jackie Kimberly, the wife of the mega-millionaire heir to the Kleenex tissue fortune. A postscript. Roxanne's most recent conquest was the hapless son of a Palm Beach doyen. She married millionaire John Hagan in late October and divorced him 6 weeks later. After John and his mom took a long sea voyage, a kind of soul-cleansing sea voyage, Roxanne and John split up. And now this rather bulky fellow is fulfilling a lifelong dream. He's learning to drive Peterbilt trucks. Is there anything off limits with the quotable and often unprintable Roxanne? Is there anything private? Is there anything not for public consumption? This is what Roxanne had to say. I probably never appreciated what privacy really meant, she told me, speaking Saturday from an Aspen ski chalet. In 1982, I lost every bit of privacy that one could lose, be it from my ex-husband, my best friends, my doctors, or my marital counselors. No information was privileged. I became a public figure immediately. Roxanne continued, I believe there are areas that are totally off limits as to what the public should have any knowledge of or is any of their business. As far as your children, your family, and what goes on in your bedroom, those areas, I believe, should be totally private. As a casual reader of Roxannalia, as I call it, I was surprised by the very public Pulitzer's reflective, serious, and direct responses to my questions. But is she right? Can a public figure maintain a zone of privacy, as campaign strategist James Carville termed it during the Clinton-Jennifer Flowers brouhaha? Do readers really have a right to know in what areas and how much? Who decides what's newsworthy? Can you expect, by the end of this presentation, to have answers, definitive answers, to the questions I just posed? No, and that's because the privacy debate is ongoing, riddled with contradictions, and unresolved. Each year, the typical American watches 1,550 hours of television, listens to 1,160 hours of radio, spends 180 hours reading newspapers, and 110 hours reading magazines, sees 37,822 commercials, and receives 216 pieces of direct mail advertising. Those statistics are from Elliot Aronson's and Anthony Pratkonis's book, The Age of Propaganda, The Everyday Use and Abuse of Persuasion. And a lot of what Americans rush to see, hear, and read focuses on the most intimate details of people's lives, not just the what, when, where, and why, not just the informative aspects of news, but something that chills, something that titillates, angers, and excites, something that makes the reader or viewer feel. Millions watch Oprah, millions tune in to Sally Jesse Raphael and Hard Copy. 21 million people tuned in to watch Jennifer Flowers on A Current Affair a little more than a year ago. And some of those same 21 million were reflected in a New York Times CBS News poll in which 55% of the respondents said the press went too far in reporting on the private lives of the presidential candidates. At the same time, another 50% said that nothing reported in the campaign should have been withheld. Are you confused? Again, at the same time, readers and viewers crave information, tons of it. There is growing concern and advocacy for Carville's zone of privacy. Many deride the press for reporting personal details about the lives of public figures, yet just as many watch, listen to, and read a glut of stuff of just that nature. Those demands, often at odds, aren't easy to reconcile. Reporting the personal details about the lives of public figures is something that many deride the press for. In pulpits and in podiums, and at podiums people wag fingers at the marauding press, which is seen as some monolithic entity with nefarious aims. So who will restrain this voracious bunch? Not, it appears, the courts. The law gives journalists extraordinary freedom to decide what to print about public figures. Journalistic standards, matters of taste, of pertinence, of contextual necessity, dictate what makes its way into print, not to mention what will sell. The law, as it regards invasion of privacy claims, is as wide as the barn door, one of People's legal staff says. You are familiar, I think, by this point in the conference, with the right of privacy doctrine first advanced in 1890 by Louis D. Brandeis, later Justice Brandeis, and Samuel Warren. Quote, "The press is overstepping in every direction the obvious bounds of propriety and of decency," Brandeis and Warren wrote. "Gossip is no longer the resource of the idle and of the vicious, but has become a trade which is pursued with industry as well as effrontery." Refined 70 years later, the law underscores the right, quote, "to be let alone." It recognizes 4 categories of invasion. The first 2, I believe, are relevant to our discussion. Cribbed from the Handbook of Publishing Law, they are 1, the public disclosure of private and embarrassing facts, that is, the publication of true but offensive material of no legitimate concern to the public, and publicity which places an individual in a false light, and that is the publication of information which, whether it is literally true or false, creates a false and offensive impression through the context of its publication. Privacy claims against publishers almost always arise from the publication of true information, information which violates a person's feelings, dignity, and solitude. A successful claim for the publication of private and embarrassing facts, the first category of invasion, as I mentioned, or for the publication of material which creates an offensive impression, must pass the test of being offensive to the average reader. But who's the average reader? And is the average reader's view of what's intimate and offensive something constant? No, it's not. Like the court's stand on privacy, our view of what's intimate and offensive is molded by social currents. Take our response to certain references, for example, references like homosexual or communist, and think about the damning power of those words in the 1950s, for example. Do they have the same force today? I don't think they do. The courts have generally taken the view that anything a public figure does is inherently newsworthy. Consequently, celebrities and other public figures have had very little success with lawsuits for the invasion of privacy. Newsworthiness, however, is a vague standard and one that the courts have tended to interpret broadly. In 1975, when our sister publication, Sports Illustrated, was sued for invasion of privacy, the court found, quote, "The line is to be drawn when publicity ceases to be the giving of information to which the public is entitled and becomes a morbid and sensational prying into private lives for its own sake, with which a reasonable member of the public with decent standards would say that he had no concern. Sports Illustrated, by the way, won. Again, if the information is newsworthy, if I'm interested, if you're interested, the law allows the press to report the most intimate details of an individual's personal life. With legal carte blanche, then, the decision whether to print or not to print lies with each news organization, lies with members of an unlicensed profession with few statutory restraints, as Tom Brokaw has said, a profession which operates often by the seat of its pants, under deadline pressure, and in a competitive heat to be first. How do we at People magazine go about our particular brand of journalism? Let me give you some history. In the summer of 1973, Andrew High School, the chairman of the board of Time Incorporated, suggested a new magazine that would deal with personalities in the news and be called People. It was launched the last week of February 1974 and offered a new kind of intimate reporting with information about prominent men and women in all fields that other magazines didn't pursue. With some amazing prescience, our first cover subject, incidentally, was Mia Farrow. People was intentionally designed to have a comfortable but strictly journalistic look to it, a look that said, these are the facts and we're not making any judgment about them. But in the 19 years since, we've grown. We've grown in the practice of our craft, we've also grown in our extraordinary reach. The magazine you see on the stands this week, and it's Sharon Stone, by the way, will be seen by some 30 million people. And we're not simply celebrity-centric, despite some of our covers. We're competitive, we're fast, and I think we deliver. We sent a reporter to Bosnia this year, we sent a reporter to Somalia last, and we sent one to Russia and the Persian Gulf the year before. You're looking at her. We sit down with the president each time, at Christmas time each year, and we have an Oval Office chat about how the year has gone and what the president sees as, our hope for the coming year. And we try to make news. We try not just to follow it. We made news, we think, with our interview of Virginia Thomas, the wife of the Supreme Court Justice, shortly after the confirmation hearings which racked the nation and put the topic of sexual harassment on the table. People, I'm happy to say, has become so much a part of the American culture, and the kind of personal reporting we do has become so prevalent that it's hard to remember, or maybe even to believe, that our brand of journalism didn't exist in this form before we came on the scene. People magazine, we immodestly say, invented personality journalism. What we do, I describe as a form of psychobiography, an attempt to penetrate the fantasy, that outer layer of well-groomed personality, and get at what's really going on in the lives of the people we write about. Always as a reporter, and I think sometimes as a good therapist, I'd ask myself what this person was made of, what events in this person's life brought them to where they are today. I was much less interested in the stuff of public record, the academic accomplishments, or the steps on the career ladder than I was in the formative experiences. The people along the way who inspired or derailed, the moments, sometimes dramatic and sometimes less so, that made them who they are. I'm reminded of a story, I think it was F. Scott Fitzgerald, though I'm not sure, a story I read a long time ago about a man who was born old, and with the passage of time, as the layers of experience fell away, got younger. Well, that's where we start, with the birth of that 70-year-old man, and look for those insights into character, how he behaves and why, before his death as an infant. By and large, People magazine deals with people who seek the public favor, as our managing editor says. Most of the people you see in the pages of our magazine sell books or records, seek votes or visibility. The bankable product is often themselves. Many, if not most, of our subjects are public figures, those who fall or who fell into the category of private individuals, as distinct from the Madonnas of this world, have been catapulted into the public consciousness by some newsworthy event, or they have willingly agreed to speak with us or have spoken to the press in the past. For the moment, I will confine my discussion to celebrities. The vast majority of what you see on TV and read in the newspapers about celebrities is what they want you to see. Most performers do interviews for one reason. They want to sell that movie, they want to sell that TV show, the album, etc. When Billy Crystal appeared on Jay Leno's opening night show last May 25th, he joked that he really shouldn't be there because he had nothing to plug. His next movie wasn't due out until September. That's a small but poignant reminder of how pervasively and automatically performers now regard the media as a marketing tool. From Crystal's perspective, there's a lot, and there's a lot of money at stake. Hollywood wealth is built largely on public image. If the image suffers, so does the pocketbook, which is why stars in studios pay publicists as much as $10,000 a month per client to influence and even control the press. But consider that Ted Danson earned $500,000 for each episode of Cheers, or that Larry Hagman made so much money on Dallas he hardly knew what to do with it. He built a new house, for example, with a roof that slides open at the touch of a button, or that Roseanne and Tom Arnold, Hollywood's most striking example of instant wealth, have not only shed pounds during their marriage, but have shed dollars, something around $10 million, on their 17,000 square foot home in Los Angeles with a cook, 3 maids, a nanny, and an office staff of 12. There's another dozen employees on their 1,700 acre farm in Iowa, where they're building a 3,200 square foot, 9-bedroom home with a bowling alley and an Olympic-sized pool. It was only last October that Tom went shopping for some birthday baubles for his wife. He stuffed $1 million, get this, $1 million into a shoebox and strode into a Beverly Hills jewelry store and presented the cash. But Tom and the clerk didn't hit it off, so he took his cash stash to Sarah Gilbert's stepfather. Sarah plays Roseanne's daughter on the show, and her stepfather happens to be a jewelry designer. Under Tom's supervision, he crafted a necklace, earrings, and bracelet consisting of 300 carats of diamonds and emeralds. And this was a generous gift, certainly a generous gift from a guy who was working in a Hormel meat packing plant in Iowa 12 years ago, and who 5 years ago was sentenced to 28 days in jail for urinating outside a McDonald's. Yes, there's a lot at stake for some of our most celebrated celebrity subjects, whose publicists want flattering photos and accompanying text which portrays their client in the most favorable light possible, and yes, a story that is timed to coincide with their latest project. Put that alongside the countervailing pressure we feel to deliver credible, complete, and interesting stories which penetrate the public facade. That tension is palpable. Take actor James Woods, for example, and his 4-year relationship with horse trainer Sarah Owen, to whom he was briefly wed. Woods denies Owen's claim that he abused her physically and emotionally during their years together. We went to print, however, with a well-sourced story on Owen, who talked to us after being approached by the tabloid TV show Hard Copy. Owen says she spoke in the belief that telling her story would help other women who haven't found the strength and courage to leave abusive relationships. Our story began with an italicized movie-like scene, which I'm going to read you. In the darkened bedroom of a small Beverly Hills home, a man sits smoking a cigarette, a shotgun clenched in his hand. A petite woman, beautiful but visibly drained, pushes open the door. She senses she is not alone. She smells smoke in the air. Then she sees the glow of a cigarette, and in its dim light, the outline of the man and the gun. "What are you doing with that gun?" she screams. He walks toward her and points it at her face. He orders her to strip, and as she stands there terrified and naked, he begins to insult her. He tells her she is ugly. He cocks the shotgun, puts it against her head. "I ought to kill you for trying to leave me," he says. He demands that she say, "I am a whore, I'm a baby killer." For half an hour, the standoff continues. He poised to shoot, she ready to die. Then suddenly the man drops to his knees, puts the gun on the bed, and begins sobbing. "My God, what have I done?" he cries. His tears burn her flesh. Weeping, she takes him in her arms and whispers, "I won't leave you." Now, admittedly, the writing is a bit purple, opening the piece with a drama worthy of some TV movie of the week. But the action gets worse. We report Owen's claim that the denouement in their tortured relationship came when she found him in the middle of the night, masturbating outside the door of her sleeping mother, who had just been diagnosed with colon cancer and who was visiting the couple. Shocking? You bet. But in the context of the story, and cited as the event which motivated Owen to finally leave Woods, we felt justified in going to print with her troubling allegation. Let me also note that we printed a letter from Woods in which he denounced Owen's, quote, vicious lies, all of which I categorically deny. Woods' publicist at the time we went to print later voluntarily left his employ, backed Owen, and now represents her. Did we violate Woods' privacy with our unflattering story? A story without glam photos of the actor and not time to his latest movie project. Woods is a public figure. He curries the public favor. He has spoken about his personal life in the past, and he was given ample opportunity to respond. We were on solid ground. Celebrities have enormous, often disproportionate influence on popular tastes and cultural values. You may wonder, a la Woods, if we print everything we know about celebrities. The answer is no, and it's no for a variety of reasons. Is the information pertinent? Is it contextually justified? Are we absolutely sure it's accurate? Is it tasteful? Is it overall necessary? Actress Demi Moore's mother, Virginia, is an uninhibited 49-year-old who will be pictured in the April issue of a skin magazine called High Society. I've never heard of it. Pictured in various stages of undress. Virginia has been in and out of alcohol and drug rehab centers for years. After 7 weeks of detox in 1991, 4 months of counseling at one of the Midwest's more famous clinics, and 3 months in a halfway house, during which time Demi footed the bills and stayed in close contact, Virginia was released. One of her first decisions was to sell the story of her recovery and her tumultuous relationship with her daughter to Hello magazine, a Spanish publication, and to the News of the World for a combined $50,000 in cash. Demi got mad, her mother says, but I didn't do it to hurt her, I did it to help myself. We interviewed Virginia, but we didn't go to print with the story. She wasn't a credible source, she hadn't spoken in Demi with 18 months, and hadn't seen her grandchildren, Rumor and Scout, in that time. We found reason to seriously doubt the veracity and certainly the currency of anything she had to say about Demi and her husband, actor Bruce Willis, and her relationship with each. Virginia appeared on various national TV shows, TV talk shows. She did not appear in the pages of People magazine. Some may argue that personality journalism, specifically celebrity journalism, is a trivial pursuit, and it's not worth the same effort and precision as a story about Yeltsin's chances for forging a new Russia or the latest research on AIDS. Although celebrity journalism makes up only about 40% of our magazine, it's critical to us to bring the same standards of reporting to every story. And they are exacting standards, regardless of whether the person has been nominated for something as momentous as the Supreme Court or as transitory as the Academy Award, which may be why people won the National Magazine Award for General Excellence in 1987 and was nominated again last year. We go in the front door, not the back, and we don't employ tabloid tactics. We don't dress up as doctors and sneak into hospital rooms. We don't steal medical records. We don't pay off maids and gardeners. We don't hide in the bushes to make sneak photos. We don't swoop down on weddings in helicopters. And we don't lie about who we are and what we're doing. We identify ourselves, we make appointments, we talk to legitimate sources, and we talk to many more than one. We stand behind what we print. And what we print is vetted by a research, fact-checking staff. It's vetted by lawyers and layer upon layer of editors. Over and above being right, which is the bottom line, we try to be fair. People magazine was born in the tumult of the Watergate era, an era in which the big payoff of investigative journalism sparked a new aggressiveness in reporting. Changing sexual mores were reflected in more explicit news coverage, and the women's movement sensitized us to what we covered and how we covered it. Politicians' extramarital dalliances, for example, were no longer shrugged aside. But clearly, the debate between private morality and public responsibility still goes on, as we saw during last year's campaign. The press is barometric, gauging and reflecting broader cultural and political trends in our pages and on our screens. Dom Bonafide, a professor of communications at American University in Washington, noted that the media goes through cycles of style and fashion. In this day and age, Bonafide said, if past President Bush invited Madonna to go swimming with him, it would be reported. Contrast what we take for granted today with the clubby, wink-wink, nudge-nudge attitude of the press during the Kennedy era. Our new aggressiveness, what has been called junkyard dog reporting, can be seen as a reaction to news organizations' willingness to roll over and play dead with Kennedy or with Lyndon Johnson, whose public drunkenness wasn't a story you saw in the nightly news or in the pages of various national publications. There was an overly cozy, overly friendly, too hands-off relationship, I think, between the press and between some of the people that we covered. And some of the most prominent journalists of the time were willing accomplices in burying the personal side of the story. The balancing act between the right to privacy and the public's right to know has always been difficult. And as I've emphasized, or as I've tried to emphasize, the debate has been shaped by changing editorial practice, which mirrors changing cultural values. Are the concerns over privacy much different, for example, in 1993 than they were in 1893? In an article in Commentary some years ago, Suzanne Garment of the American Enterprise Institute wrote that the American press, we must remember, has always been more or less sensationalist toward the lives of public figures, including politicians. Early on in our journalistic history came scandal-mongering motivated by factional politics. Then, in addition, we got scandal-mongering by the popular, i.e. the commercial press. Finally, there appeared scandal-mongering that drew about itself the cloak of public interest. But the phenomenon is an old one, Garment writes, and in many respects, the press used to be more scurrilous than it is today. There were, admittedly, periods when the scandal stories were relatively sparse, but the constraining causes were less likely to be the press's internal ethical rules than factors like the limits on reporting capabilities or capacities and the relatively low visibility of some areas of government. Again, journalism isn't an exact science. Most decisions on how and whether to cover a given story are based on interest, are based on journalistic instinct, and, to be frank, what will sell within the limits of taste and legality. Many decisions are made under deadline pressure and, as I've said, in the midst of a competitive heat. Most decisions are not the result of long hours of ethical debate. Shrinking media profits and increased competition for the reader also up the ante and affect what you see or what you read in print. Complex stories, ones that take a commitment of limited resources over long periods of time and that don't have a clear payoff, are less likely to be launched by dollar-conscious news managers. You better have a big paper with a big circulation to subject your readers to the 12-part series rife with stats and mind-numbing analysis. Please don't think I'm arguing against the coverage of substantive, meaty, and complex issues. The SNL crisis is one such example. What I am pointing to is a reality, and it's a reality which is often hard to swallow in a competitive media marketplace. In the New York Times recently, Anna Quindlen, the columnist, described being a reporter, and I think she described it beautifully, as much a diagnosis as a job description. It's a strange business, she wrote, making a living off other people's misfortunes, standing in the rubble with a press card as a nominal shield, writing in a crabbed hand notes no one else can read, riding an adrenaline surge that ends in a product at once flimsy and influential. So, as we battle for more readers or viewers, the line between too far enough and not far enough gets blurry and indistinct. Do we pay as much attention to the 2-inch newspaper item about the woman attacked on 3rd Street as we do to the televised courtroom drama of William Kennedy Smith, the nephew of a U.S. Senator, the cousin of Caroline, and the grown-up John, who was accused and acquitted of rape? Is that 2-inch story less important? Are the circumstances all around less tragic? We have the opposite of silence now, Quinlan wrote. We are awash in the revealed world, talking of things that for so long were adjudged unspeakable. Events that are merely tragic must yield space on the page for those that are truly terrible. Gang rapes instead of rapes, pre-adolescent killers instead of teenage ones. It's a sliding scale, and sometimes you have to wonder where and when the slide will end. Have I given you a clear sense of where the personal and private lie and where the public begins? I doubt it. It wasn't my intention to settle an ongoing and emotionally charged debate. What is critical, I believe, is that we do debate, that we bring this debate to bear on our work day to day, not just the exceptional circumstance. Yes, as Quinlan wrote, I have stood in the rubble, dirt smudge, scribbling notes only I can read, as I witnessed, somewhat numbed, what the worst of life offers. And I personally have regrets. One more story. As a young reporter working on a piece on missing children, I interviewed the Smith family. That's not their name, but it was long ago and they may want to forget. Gina, their dark-eyed 12-year-old, had been missing for 6 months. She vanished on her way home from school. Mrs. Smith confided to me that while she wept all the time, her husband, a man she once loved dearly, was silent and cold, lost in the searing pain of Gina's abduction. 6 months before, they were a happy family, and now she was contemplating leaving him. Where was Gina? A day or so before we went to print with our story, the result of a months-long countrywide effort, Gina rang her parents' doorbell. She had been held by a sexual psychopath, brutalized in unimaginable ways, and suddenly one day let go. Hurrying toward deadline, we asked the family if we could report this miraculous conclusion, something all too rare in the very sad cases of missing children. So I went back to see the Smith family literally hours within Gina's return. I was accompanied by a photographer. I watched the child tentatively play with her cousins on a California beach, and her parents, overjoyed, reestablished their relationship. I would not make the same decision today that I did that day, under deadline pressure with editors anxious for my copy. Here were loving but psychologically unsophisticated people offering up their traumatized little girl for an interview. And here was a child who visibly trembled when I asked her the first question about her captivity. Was it critical for our story that I interviewed Gina? Was it absolutely critical? No, I don't think so. Was the potential damage, emotional damage to the child, and of course that's not something I can gauge, was that something I really considered? Was I more concerned about pleasing my editors and beating out the rest of the press? Did I violate that child's privacy, even with the full permission and participation of her parents? Would her parents regret the story with photos of Gina later? In conclusion, our lives are made up of a series of moral judgments, and our work, especially as journalists, is not exempt. That day, with Gina sitting next to me on a stained beige sofa, I believe I made the wrong call, and it's something that I regret a decade later. Thank you. I'm happy to take any questions.
You maintain that 40% of your publication is given over to celebrity interviews. Why isn't there more human interest story from the back page, the person attacked with a knife? It seems to me that that was Bernie Goetz's main thrust, is that he refused to talk to the press more than he did because a few months before he had been buried in the back pages and he had been attacked prior to the altercation that thrust him into the limelight.
Well, again, I think we know what we are, we know what our readers expect, and that we try to balance our coverage. I mean, we certainly think that, celebrity journalism, reporting, and we've done many covers on Princess Diana, for example, is something that's important. It's something that readers want. I mean, at the same time, our coverage, I believe, is balanced. I mean, we do commit resources, people, money, time, effort to stories that we feel are important. I spent, for example, 3 months in the Persian Gulf, and that's not something that I think a lot of people think of People magazine as doing. And I believe the stories that we did were competitive news stories with a personality angle. Does that answer a bit of your question, or do you want to pursue it a little bit further? Well, I don't think, again, we, certainly we have a social service function. I mean, we believe that we provide perspective on the news. We do a lot of Q&As, for example. I mean, during the Trade Center bombing, we will find, an expert on terrorism and provide some perspective on that story that, given our deadline, and we are a weekly publication, we can't cover in the sort of day-to-day fashion, obviously, of a newspaper. Also, the stories that we do, we are very aware are definitive in some sense. I mean, we provide that first glimpse of history, and we have to be very concerned when we go to print, or we are very concerned when we go to print, that our story is complete. And it's very hard for us to grapple with breaking news. But again, I don't think we would say, in sort of some, high-mind fashion, well, the Persian Gulf War is being well enough covered. Rather, we would say we have something to bring to this story. We have the emotional bottom line to provide. I mean, one example, and this is from early in my career, I did a story on Candy Lightner of Mothers Against Drunk Drivers. Our sister publication, Time Magazine, provided you with, the statistics on drunk driving deaths in America, the economic impact. What we tried to do was tell the story of a mother who lost her child, and losing her child clearly galvanized her to make a big difference. So again, we will provide you with the news, but what we are, and again, I think we know what we are, we know what we want to deliver, is that emotional bottom line. Well, I mean, again, I think anybody would be dishonest standing up on this stage to say that decisions are not, driven by economic realities, by the marketplace. And I'm certainly not going to stand here and say that, we, sort of function like the American Journal of Philosophy. I mean, we will, and we do debate which of our covers sell. At the same time, we also spend a lot of time talking about stories that we believe are important. We had I think a 6 or 7 page lead story in the magazine some weeks ago, produced by a reporter who lives in Coeur d'Alene, a woman named Kathy Freed, about sort of new advances, interesting solutions to the countrywide problem of daycare. And this was a story, in which we focused on a project, I think in the Seattle area, which combines, young children with the elderly in a nursing home setting. So again, that was a story that we thought was important to do. It was not something that, say, if we put on the cover, would sell. But it was something that appeared in our pages. And again, we do make decisions, on what will sell, but that's not what we do exclusively. We also think that there are important stories to do. Our cover on Arthur Ashe, for example, did not sell well. Was it an important story to do? Yes. And was it a story we would do again? Yes.
You described your experience and your story with Gina, and I gathered from your comments that given that similar circumstance, you wouldn't make the same decision now. That's an experiential thing for you now as an experienced reporter. Has your organization adopted a similar philosophy so that new people coming into the business might make a better decision with the help of the experience that you've had?
Many people would argue with me. Many reporters would argue with my description of that story, my emotional response to the decision I made. I mean, many would argue that there wasn't anything wrong at all with interviewing Gina. I think what I tried to bring out in this presentation is that we make judgments case by case. I mean, this is a profession in which there isn't a rule book, and certainly we're not constrained by the courts. Again, as people's attorney said, you know, it's as wide as the barn door what we can do. But I think what we try to do, you know, certainly at People, but I really can't think of many other reporters working at a national level who, you know, have so totally, you know, thrown out the window their sense of what's right, of what's moral, of how to handle a particular situation. I mean, again, Gina may not have been at all emotionally damaged or further traumatized by my interviewing her within hours of her return. She was, I'm sure, she had spoken with the police, that she had spoken with therapists, but I didn't feel I needed to do that with this child trembling by me, you know, sitting by me on the sofa. It was something that I wouldn't do again if presented with sort of a similar circumstance. But again, these are decisions you make case by case. There isn't a rule book.
Several months ago, Barbara Walters interviewed the killer of John Lennon in front of millions of viewers. She said the purpose of the interview was not to glorify what he had done and to bring him publicity because of it, but just to show how much he had suffered. The end result, isn't that in front of millions of viewers, isn't that glorifying him and bringing him publicity?
Well, I'm not sure it's glorifying him. It is bringing him publicity. I also probably would quibble with Barbara Walters' description of the reason for her interview being to show how he suffered. On the other hand, our story on Jeffrey Dahmer, for example, was one of our cover story on Jeffrey Dahmer was one of the best read stories of, I think, the last decade. We all want to know. We all want to know what has brought this person to this, you know, extraordinary and clearly very tragic moment in his life and, you know, in the lives of others. When I spoke about the kind of psychobiography we do, I mean, I think I sort of apply that in my, you know, in my daily life. I mean, I want to know about your life. I want to know about your job. I want to know what brought you to Coeur d'Alene. I want to know if your parents were born in Idaho. I mean, I think that there is something valid about the kind of personal reporting that we do. I'm not sure, again, I would say that that glorified David Chapman, was it? But it certainly, if handled correctly, may have given some insight into the troubled mind of this man. I'm happy to wait. Yes, please.
Do you think that there's a difference between what people want to know and news? And if you do think there's a difference between those two things, would you explore what that difference is?
Well, I think that's you know, part of the dilemma in the debate on privacy. You know, certainly, you know, the courts have not established specifically what's newsworthy. I mean, what is newsworthy? That I think boils down to what I'm interested in and what you're interested in. It's certainly kind of an ongoing debate, but as a legal standard, it's a very broad one, and it's open to to a lot of interpretation.
What about an ethical, regarding an ethical standard as opposed to just a legal?
Well, again, I don't know that there is a hard and fast ethical standard, as it regards most professions. I think if I seem as though I'm even somewhat confused, I think again there aren't hard answers in this area. You make a decision on what you print, on what's newsworthy, case by case. You make a decision on whether it's necessary, whether it's, this bit of information, for example, is contextually justified. And determining whether it is justified is something, again, I think you do case by case, looking at the merits of each situation. But I think that's an important point to pursue, and the question that you're asking is an extremely good one, and I wish I could glibly, in a pretty facile manner, answer it, and I can't. Because again, I think that it's a wide open topic. Well, I am happy to draw this to a close and turn this over to Joanne, who introduced me. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Maria. I know we all enjoyed listening to your speech this morning and learning more about People Magazine and the right of privacy. I'd like to thank all of you for attending and remind you of the continuation at 12 noon in the Bonner Room, the panel discussion that will be in regard to Maria's presentation this morning, and she will also be there, so if you have more questions, I'm sure she'll have time to answer them. Thank you.